Hello, my name is Penny Nixon. I'm a pelvic health physiotherapist. I'd like to take this opportunity to teach you about how chronic pain manifests itself, and really we're thinking about our patients who have got pain in the nether regions, so might have a diagnosis of vulvodynia, vestibulodynia, or maybe even the endometriosis type patients. So the female chronic pains is really what we're thinking about today. So I am no artist, but we're going to give it a go on here. So this shows you the pelvic floor or the lower abdominal region, and this, believe it or not, is the brain. So we get pain, the initial pain, perhaps for the patients who had vulvodynia as a little girl, first time putting tampons in, will have sent a message to the brain. And the brain processes that information. At that time, it will have been a very simple message. It will have been, oh my goodness, well, it's the first time I've tried using tampons, it's bound to be sore. Sends a message to sort of process that story, and then back to the beginning again. So it's quite a simple message. The brain then sends messages down to the pelvic floor region to try and make it better. Now, every time this pain manifests itself, it sends messages up to the brain processes that message, and more messages are sent down to the pelvic floor region. As this goes on and on and on, what happens is the story that happens in the brain becomes much more complicated. One thought leads to another and leads to another. We call it neurotagging. It's a bit like kiss chase for thoughts in the brain. And it becomes a very complicated, very embroidered system. Now, when we've got lots and lots of messages going up to the brain, it switches on something called the limbic nervous system. This is the emotional nervous system, which is split into two bits. We've got the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic. Now, the sympathetic nervous system is anything but sympathetic. This is the fear, flight, fight response. It's as if you're being chased by a saber-toothed bear down the road. You know, if you imagine that bear's been let out of the zoo, it's chasing you down the road, it gives you that whole major panic, I have to run feeling. You get hot, you get sweaty, you get palpitations going. It's the most horrible feeling. So we get adrenaline, cortisol, and substance P produced. So every time you're getting your pain, it switches on the emotional system, and it is actually producing the same hormones that you would get as if you were being chased down the road by the bear. Okay, so we're going to come back to our brain. So the brain, we've got this really complicated story going on here, and this switches on a system called PAG, which is the periaqueductal grey matter. Now, this impacts on the nerve pathways that are going down back to the pelvic region. Normally, we have a nice little balance of excitatory and inhibitory messages going down. But what happens when there's this whole complexity going on here is the inhibition stops. So all we end up with is excitation in our nervous system. So this means that our nervous system ends up being on red alert. It's sensitised, it's waiting to pounce. So if I stroke my arm, that shouldn't hurt. If I thump my arm, that's allowed to hurt. But actually, anybody coping with chronic pain, which is pain that you've had for more than 3 months, this stroking action will actually elicit a pain response. Okay, so this is a closed loop system. So how do we break into that is the million-dollar question. Well, what we want to do is come back to our hormones here. So we've got the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. What we actually want to do is to switch on the parasympathetic nervous system. We want to produce endorphins, serotonin, and we want to get a nice little balance if we think about a seesaw. At the moment, our seesaw is looking like this, with the sympathetic really heavy and the parasympathetic right up in the air. Okay, so we want to get back to this balance up here. So with treatment, what we want to do is redress that hormonal response. So we want to switch on the serotonin and the endorphin response. So there are lots of ways that you can do that. The first thing that we want you to do is start doing some relaxation. So you can do this in many ways. You can just start doing some nice relaxed breathing techniques, doing some diaphragmatic breathing, breathing around a square. You could do something like mindfulness. So there are lots and lots of apps that you can get on your phone, like Headspace, Insight, 7 Days of Calm. And there are many, many relaxation CDs that you could find to use. Yoga, Tai Chi, they all have a similar response. So I would really recommend that you start doing something and find something that you enjoy. The next thing to think about is pelvic floor relaxation. So we all know how to work those pelvic floor muscles, which is lifting up those muscles from underneath. But for people in chronic pain, what we often see is that those muscles are overworking, working too hard and for too long, and we need to let those muscles go. So what you can think about doing, I'll just draw this in the middle of here, is pelvic floor on. Imagine there's a little block of flats with 3 stories. Let that pelvic floor go to the 2nd floor, 1st floor, ground floor. We have a basement, and we also have a wine cellar, and clearly we want that pelvic floor to end up all the way down in that wine cellar. So it's not about pushing, it's about letting go of those muscles. So I'd really recommend that you re-engage with those pelvic floor muscles, find out where they are, and can I let them go fully. The next thing to think about are stretches. When you see us in physiotherapy, we will give you a whole list of stretches to do. But in the meantime, think about all the muscle groups around the pelvis and really stretching out all of those muscles, particularly the inner thigh ones. And finally, we want you to do exercise. We want you to think about exercising every day, at least half an hour. Walking counts, but exercise with a little bit of oomph, so you really get that heart pumping a little bit. Now, the other thing we need to think about is the volume button. There are lots and lots of things in life that can turn the pain volume button up. It's like being plugged into a Pain Roberts radio. So things like if you're very stressed or anxious or worried about things or depressed, will turn that pain volume up quicker than anything else. If you're not sleeping well, if you're worried about your relationship or sex or worried about work, if you're not communicating with your friends, not able to go on holiday, not able to do everything that you would normally do at home because of your issues, all of those things will turn the pain volume button up. So what I suggest is that you get a piece of paper and you write a list of the things where your pain is impacting. What are you struggling with? And on the other side of your page, start writing down in fairy steps what you're going to do about it to make positive changes. So just little small changes. So this is a positive, proactive approach to pain management.